Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of The Turning Point. Today, we're joined by our insightful friends, David and Nathan, and of course, our good and dear friend, Edo. It's so great to have you back, brother. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Let's see. I'm recovering for this past storm that I have been through in the last 3 months. But I'm very happy to be back with the four of us together. It really feels like the turning point is complete, just missing Vandel.
Yeah. It's incredible what a team we've created here. David, you're doing all right? It's good to see you.
Yep. Fantastic as ever. Yeah.
David was at my wedding.
Yeah. It was an amazing time.
Yeah. And Nathan, it's great to see you again.
You two guys, very good to be here. And congratulations, Versan, on your marriage.
I appreciate it, and all the love and support from the whole community as well. All right, guys, we have a lot to talk about. I want to give people a quick overview over the markets. And at first glance, let's start with the US dollar. Real quick, it does seem strong, but I want to make it very clear to people that no matter how strong the dollar looks, the purchasing power is still being eroded because of inflation. The more money we keep printing, the more the currency and the purchasing power has to devalue. So inflation is going to continue to erode whatever purchasing power you're saving. And the dollar might look strong on paper, but its actual value in everyday transactions is continuously declining. Real quick, we did also see the gold and silver market, which are in reality, historically, these are safe havens, but they have been getting hit pretty damn hard. And this is simple market manipulation. We've seen this many times at the highest levels. You don't have to look any further than Wall Street's history of interference with the metals market. And of course, we know JP Morgan has multiple felonies in this arena again. So the fact that gold and silver are not surging as expected, it's not in a market anomaly. It's a calculated suppression of all the value that we see. Final thing I'll say is that central banks are anticipating more money printing, and that's exactly why gold and silver and other metals were starting to run in the first place. Of course, we can go into more detail, but I'll leave that aside. So I've been out of the loop for a little bit. I think it would be great if maybe, Edo could start first and bring us up to speed on current events. And we'll talk maybe about the regulatory environment in the Ripple XRP ecosystem. Would you like to begin, Edo?
Yeah, I can go ahead. Just an overall look on the current situation of the world's economy. And I think that's something that goes for the United States, goes for Europe, Asia as well. I see this effect happening all across the globe. And that's the devaluation of currency. I was just having this conversation a couple of days ago with a friend of mine from Poland, and we were talking that all the way until about 2015 or 2015 it has kind of started, but when the pandemic came in 2019, that's exactly when we saw the purchasing power decreasing substantially in Europe. And what we have observed is that exactly from 2019 to 2025, we had probably, I would argue that everything has tripled in price. And I'm talking about specifically in Europe. You guys can comment about the United States. Perhaps Nathan can provide some insights about Australia. But whenever we're talking about groceries, we're talking about the price of oil and gas in Europe, or we're talking about the price of the rent, and everything has gone up substantially. And that's part of a process of destroying the middle class. So just to clarify, I think this process is not fully over. I think we are perhaps 60% or 50%. And that's why we have been protecting our investments with precious metals. I do expect a massive run for silver and gold. I still believe these assets are undervalued given the current market situation. I was looking for the charts of both gold and silver. I know Versan also has been talking about platinum. Now, when it comes down to digital assets, I really want to hear your perspective, guys, because as you know, in the last 3 months, basically, I have been fighting a battle against X, and I have not been updating myself so much in regards to crypto, but I have published a video recently. You guys feel free to watch the video. But I have a feeling that right now the next big run is going to happen with silver and gold.
David, bring us up to speed real quick, if that's all right. Or
Sure.
Nathan, either one of you. My apologies.
No, you're good. I think I agree that we will see an increase in the demand for gold and silver for sure, especially when you got the FOMC meeting at the end of this month. In fact, tomorrow and into the 29th, everybody is kind of like expecting at least a 25 basis points drop in the rate. Obviously, that brings liquidity into the market. The central bank makes it much more cheaper for commercial banks to get money. They go out there, they lend it to the big players. Now, will that trickle down to the average person? This is something that is a misnomer. I think, like, when they lower the interest rates, it usually takes quite a while before you see a drop in your mortgage rate, your bank loans, your credit card, interest rates. So big disconnect from the market and, of course, the economy. And the economy, as you say, is really hurting. People know it. They can feel it. They're lined up around the block, around the wide world, to get their hands on, some silver, some gold, if they can get it physically at all. So I do believe, yeah, we will definitely see a move up in the price of those assets. But I also believe that they are going to play with the paper market, and they've manipulated the gold and silver markets extensively. And historically, we've seen the major players do that. They get like almost $1 billion fine. JP Morgan, to them, that's just a cost of doing business. One of the things I think that is very interesting is you've got people like Larry Fink coming out and saying, hey, these digital assets could also represent a significant flight to safety when you're talking about devaluing fiat currency and dollar. And we know that when interest rates comes in, money moves. And where does it move? Well, it moves away from, all these safe havens into where they can actually make significant increases, on the returns on their investment. This space represents probably the greatest opportunity that these guys have been salivating for probably for decades, because it's, to them, a brand new arena. Yes, it's been around since 2013, but it has not, the risk for a lot of these institutions, with no regulatory clarity and none of that, it's put them outside the realm of really touching it because of the fiduciary responsibility. Well, you get the regulatory clarity in there, you get all the ETFs in there, and you watch a flight to, to these assets as well. And I'm telling you, I really do believe that they will result in a significant upside, especially when you're talking about pension funds and, these kind of things that have had restrictions on them. The spot ETFs, not the futures market, of course, but the spot ETFs, they're required to hold the asset, the underlying asset. It's going to create a significant demand. One of the big factors I think we need to consider is all the SPACs that are getting released right now. These special purpose acquisition corporations. You had Evernorth. We know they just came out, 2 weeks ago? They raised $1 billion with the intent to buy XRP with that. These strategic reserves, corporations are loading up into the hundreds of millions. There's now 13, 14 of them, 11 for sure. 500 million, 300 million. Why, oh, why would whales go out there and put in billions of dollars into accumulating XRP alone? That's what the SPAC is for, just to accumulate XRP, if they did not see any future value in its use or future value in holding it. So that's kind of my thinking. I think we will see commodities increase for sure, but I also think that these digital assets are going to take the place of these failing currencies, and it's going to change the way the world works.
We're going to get into digital assets here in a moment, but you certainly raised some very valid points. I do want to get Nathan's take real quick on what he's experiencing out there in Australia. We're trying to make sure that everyone is getting an understanding of what's happening, because you're in Greece, you're in Australia, David and I are in the US, and overall, we are experiencing the same thing. We see central banks acutely aware of all of this, and this is what we're anticipating. The M2 money supply is going to increase. So they're planning to print more money while the economy continues to slow. This is just a classic move to maintain liquidity, but one that inherently devalues fiat currencies everywhere. So Nathan, maybe you can give us a little bit of your take and bring us up to speed of what's happening in Australia.
For sure. I'll share my last couple of weeks. If you could just, I've got a little share screen that might add some flavor to this sentiment. Yeah, there we go. Beautiful. I mentioned this a couple of weeks back, but I've been pretty public with saying that at some point they will revalue gold in the US, which is there's probably most of your massive upside in the future. We don't know when this will play out, but it's written here on the Fed's website. This came out in August, glossed over by most. They're literally starting to program it out. But as for my experience, last couple of weeks, I've done a fair bit on this. I think, from the early 2000s, we've seen coffee price, just a cup of coffee, go up 3.5 times here from, just under $2 for a cup of coffee over to mid sixes towards $7 on average Australian dollar. And yeah, it's crippling. I went to a bullion dealer up here on the sunny coast in Queensland last week, Harrington's, shout out Harrington's, and had a great chat with their owner. And it was great to get his perspective on just what's happening, particularly in the silver markets. That was what was mind-blowing. The gold bars, as of last week, were completely gone. So it was incredibly hard to source any major gold bars. So we're talking probably upwards of 0.5 kilogram. The smaller fractional stuff was still very accessible, but the larger quantities had just been wiped out. And that wasn't just for Harrington's, that was across the board. And then it got into silver. Silver, there's a complete supply chain breakdown. And I know it's not just here in Australia. This is quite widespread globally, but he was amazed at just how crazy the silver market had become, in the sense that the distributors couldn't actually source any bulk orders from refiners because the refiners couldn't get a fair price from the people pulling it out of the ground. So the entire chain is broken. It still is broken. So you talk about manipulation. The silver price right now should be well over 100, probably more per ounce US. There's a major discrepancy there. It's not being reflected at all. And as for sales, I mean, they literally could only sell you small coins. So there was no fractionals, and there was nothing up to kilo bars or multi-kilo bars gone. And they couldn't even order. So Harrington's weren't even able to order from refiners. Massive backlogs. Don't know if that's changed this week. I'm going to catch up with him at some point this week to see if there is any different outlook. But yeah, crazy. And then right as things get wild, as you said, they release the pressure valve seemingly, and we're into what I see on the charts is probably a bit of a distribution cooling off period for the metals, and the capital rotation, as we can see, has already started to come back into the crypto space. I called this last week. Gold made a clear double top, in my opinion. For now, it's cooling off, and the markets have accordingly picked up. And then there's the rosy chatter about the China-US trade deal potentially being sorted. And, off we go again. So maybe that solves the volume issues that Ito was highlighting last week. But it remains to be seen. We'll see how it plays out.
No, it's a very interesting take. Absolutely spot on. And, the idea of a gold revaluation kind of ties us in. Somebody did ask about how XRP and the debt, for instance, and we'll get into that here in a moment. And of course, I want to hear what you've been talking about, Nathan, from your videos. I'm seeing a lot of positive feedback on that. But you have to ask the question, like, where's institutional money going? Increasingly, it's flowing into the digital ecosystem. And I think digital assets overall, some of them, very specific ones, they're becoming more of a systemic hedge. And then you start bridging this. I put out a video the other day. If you integrated physical tangible assets through the XRP ledger and have these smart contracts, side chains, whatever you want to call them, and this is where a revaluation potentially of gold becomes critical. If you can increase the gold price, you can significantly decrease the deficit. And there's like a tied relationship there between central bank gold buying and, of course, the infrastructure that we're seeing. So it's about more restoring gold's role as a base layer of trust in the system. And I think that's the real hidden story that a lot of people are not talking about. But revaluing the gold price, it's inevitable at some point because the deficit is going to explode. And typically when debts need to be resolved, we either go to war, and you do see some sort of gold confiscation, something along those lines. So it's a very interesting subject. I tried my best to kind of break this down. I did put a video out, not sure if you guys saw it, where I explain how this is actually possible, how it could be achieved. And again, it's not really XRP being backed by gold. It's more about bridging the two, the digital and the physical. And I think that's the real hidden story here. So it's going to happen inevitably. I really believe this. It was the World Gold Council who kind of led me on this path back in 2021. So very interesting, certainly. Edo, do you have any thoughts you'd like to add to that?
I would actually talk about something that is also stealing our wealth, and that's not only inflation. And I also want to hear your thoughts about the United States and Australia. But what's happening silently in Europe is that governments are approving new laws and decrees to actually find new ways for taxation. So they are really coming for people's savings in the form of taxation. I just had this conversation with a friend of mine from the Netherlands, and they say that from 2027 onwards, Dutch citizens are going to be double taxed. So basically, if you want to move abroad, you can't just forget about your previous tax residence. You're going to be liable to pay double taxation. And that's a lot of people now trying to actually get out of the Netherlands, but that's also happening in other European European countries, not capitals, by mistake, I say that. So the situation here is that we really have some sort of communist governments that are trying to tax the citizens more like rob you. That's how I call it. I don't call it taxation. It's basically robbery. So there is a movement of people trying to actually find ways to bypass the taxation system. And that's also going to apply for crypto gains and dividends. So it's a very serious situation. And I advise, if you are a European citizen, just like myself, find a friendly jurisdiction. I think that's extremely important before 2027. So basically you have around 2 years before most countries start to adopt more heavy taxation systems. That's also going to seize your crypto gains. So that's something to consider for the next 2 years. I leave a personal advice. I think Cyprus, if you are based in Europe, I think that's a great solution to actually avoid taxes and dividends on your crypto gains. And I want to hear your perspective, Versan, David, and Nathan. How is with the taxation in the United States and Australia? Are governments also turning into tyrants and actually trying to steal your gains?
Yeah, I think I would agree with you there. Even in my video that I threw out this morning, one of the things was the disparity between states in the United States. So, for instance, you have a state like California that is proposing like extreme tax on the rich. And, of course, my take on that was, well, hey, we're investing in this space so that we do have resources. We get a big return on our investment. And of course, a lot of people have goals for that include, some sort of establishing a business or a residual income that may eventually employ people. And when you think of this ideology that they have to, kind of like steal the wealth via tax, and California has implemented an exit tax, by the way. So when you leave the state, even though you've left the state, they want it, you to be paying taxes to the state of California, even for a number of years after which you've left, which I think is going to get challenged all the way to the Supreme Court. But this is kind of this idea. Well, when you do that and you tax, these wealthy individuals or corporations like that, they're just going to vote with their boots, like you are just recommending. Find a jurisdiction where you're not going to be subject to such heavy levels of taxation, which in my mind is as well a form of theft, because you're not getting very much back in terms of your services or resources, this or that, for the tax. And a lot of that money is so frivolously used, and they'll take a maybe an endangered worm or something like that, and put millions of dollars into some study with respect to that. Meanwhile, they're siphoning money off like crazy from you and I. And as investors in this digital asset space, that is a major, major deal. Now, another jurisdiction that a person could look at is in Dubai. Dubai is so, friendly to investment, and you only have to be there for maybe 3 weeks and you could obtain residency status in Dubai. And of course, it's probably one of the biggest innovators for this blockchain hub. XRP is treated as if it's actually a national currency over there. You can pay your employees with XRP, you can pay your bills with XRP, you can buy your groceries, cars, houses. And I think you're right. I think a lot of people are going to vote with their feet. They're going to move out of these jurisdictions, but it is a backwards way of thinking, because those that have those resources that can invest into the economy while they create jobs, those jobs spin off to buying houses, buying cars, buying this. You want to kill your economy? Just be so heavy-handed with taxation, but that's the whole deal. Remember, these guys want us all on universal basic income. There's a reason for the taxation. It's not just, we need more money. No, they want to take it from you so that you're dependent on them. And that's how I kind of view that.
If I could complement what you're saying here, taxation has never been about revenue. It's really about control. And the middle class does carry the heaviest tax burden because it's the class that actually threatens the system most. And the wealth preservation that these big elite or deep state or whatever you want to call them, right? They preserve their wealth through assets. And typically the middle class, or the poor, I'm sorry, which they've also created, they depend on the subsidies. The middle class really is the bridge between independence and servitude. And that's kind of where a lot of us fit into. But the hidden tax is the inflation. And that kind of ties us back to what we talked about in the very beginning, right? It erodes the savings while, keeping wages stagnant. And that's kind of where we are today. So it pushes more and more people to borrow and to comply. So I did see some of the comments here about the tax laws, and we are up to speed on the tax laws. But did you know the fact that we're so few of us in the world that understand these tax laws that you're talking about, that they could still use law and enforcement that they've weaponized and controlled through these systems to arrest you and put you in prison? If everybody united, and there was a famous rapper that actually said this once. He said, just if everybody did not pay their taxes altogether, then you can fight the system. That came from a rapper, which is kind of funny, right? So if one or two people, or even a few thousand or 100,000 stop paying taxes, believe me, they'd be arrested. So there's a real challenge here because there's not enough education in the system, in the middle class, the people that see what we're talking about here. So again, people are forced and to borrow and to comply to these systems. It's the system that doesn't want free thinkers, right? And that's why we're trying so hard to educate people and have these discussions. And of course, you have an obligation, the listeners, to do this to your family and your friends, okay? Final thing I'll say, this is why real assets, gold and silver. Me and David, we talk about this a lot off record. Gold's going to be manipulated. What did I tell you, David? I said, I don't care if it gets manipulated. I don't care if the central banks say that gold is worth $2,000. In my opinion, it's not. It's worth a lot more than that. And digital collateral to a degree. I think XRP is important. But then again, with digital IDs and these taxation things you're talking about, Edo, you have a real problem there, right? It's all digital infrastructure. So, I've always been concerned about that, but that's why my positions in physical tangible assets are significantly higher. So I just see things a little bit differently. I know there's a lot of optimism in the ecosystem, and I do have that optimism as well, but real assets that are outside the system, that's sovereignty, ladies and gentlemen. Until we have proper regulations, maybe that can give us control without the banks being involved, then I think you have a discussion there. I don't know, guys, but we'll get into the details here in a moment. Nathan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, we've talked a bit off the record about my time in Cyprus. Edo is very gracious. When I was in Europe for 3 months, he made some wonderful introductions for me to one of his legal partners. And yeah, my partner and I spent about 3 months, not 3 months, about a month there, just sussing it out. I think at the end of the day, for people that perhaps aren't in Europe, where it's more difficult to access these tax havens, but even around here, you know, you got Vanuatu, which is close to us, some of the other islands. It does come down to quality of life. I'm at the point, personally, it says in the Bible, pay your taxes and I'll handle the rest. That's what the big fella says. I prefer my quality of life and not stressing about dodging the taxes here in Australia than living in Cyprus. I know exactly to a T, meticulously, what's required of me to go and live there and absolve my tax citizenship here in Australia. And after weighing up all the options, it's just not for me and my partner. And if it's something you guys want to explore, any listeners here in the Southern Hemisphere, by all means, go and do it. And, you know, reach out to one of us, me, I can point you in the right direction. But I've got friends there living in Cyprus at the moment who've gone through the whole process. I sat there and had multiple dinners with them. So it's up to you. But I'd just say, from a philosophical standpoint, just weigh up your quality of life, because to do it, whether it's Dubai, Cyprus, Vanuatu, wherever, it's going to completely change the way you live. Your community will change, and that might be a good thing. Your hobbies will change, your routine will change. So just factor that in. That's where I've landed on the tax mitigation front. I don't enjoy paying taxes, but I think we're all going to win in the end, and we're certainly going to make up for whatever we're paying out now in our handsome gains from our digital assets and physical assets.
There is another option that I think we should at least throw out there. Most of us are living in jurisdictions where there are self-assessing systems. United States, Australia under the Westminster system. You know, I'm pretty sure EU is like this as well. It's a self-assessing system where we report our income and all that kind of stuff. Well, tax avoidance is a whole lot different than tax evasion. And there are techniques that can be employed. Now, this is where you would probably need to speak or employ a tax planner, but using legal structures to your advantage can really, now it requires a level of sophistication and effort that a person needs to employ. But definitely in any Commonwealth country like Australia or in the United States or things like that, there are legal structures that can be employed and tax plans that can be applied inside those legal structures that a person could really avoid, in some cases, having to pay any tax on gains. And let me give you an example of one. If, for instance, you set up a legal entity and inside that legal entity, you put your digital assets, and, you know, that's a capital contribution, and they keep, in the United States, you can use an LLC where there's that pass through. You keep the long-term capital gains designation there. You don't lose it. But in there, you then, you know, borrow against those assets. Well, when you borrow against assets, right, a loan is not a capital gain. And then you can employ those funds in other things that you're doing, other businesses or whatever. And, you know, you can insure them. I mean, there's a lot of different things, but this is just a Reader's Digest version, but there are ways in which that can be done. Now, right now, I do believe that the market as it stands in this digital asset space for borrowing against assets because of the volatility is a very risky proposition, because of course you can get liquidated very quick if they require additional security to cover, you know, the collateral or additional collateral to cover the loan. But when we get to that regulatory clarity piece, I think that they will treat loans against these assets the same as they do with equities. If an equity drops in price, in most cases, the bank that's made the loan will just let the life of the loan live out because they know there's an ebb and flow to markets. Well, we're too volatile for that right now, and there are predatory lenders, but I believe a day will come when that will present itself in a regulatory clarity environment. And that might be a way in which a person could mitigate their exposure to taxation in a very legal, way. And those tax plans and structures do exist, and there's availability for that. Now, they're not published as forms in the, out there. You're going to have to hire professionals to assist you in developing that. But I would say that that provides an alternative as well.
Yeah, let me be clear, just to dovetail off that, Dave. Big difference between tax minimization and tax avoidance. I'm all for tax minimization. And yes, I'm in the process at the moment of doing all that. And through Australian means, but that's why I explored over in Europe and went through the Cyprus routes. And minimization, 100% within the legal framework, you've got to. You'd be silly not to.
Very good points, gentlemen. As far as the digital asset ecosystem, there is a lot to unpack over there. We'll get into that here. I know David raised some very valid points we'll talk about here. We are seeing a real consolidation, and I think it's all being driven by Ripple and Stellar. They are the ones behind the scenes that are really shaping the digital asset ecosystem. It's very interesting because when you start to trace back even the foundational documents, some of the things we've talked about over the years, the real intentions behind the system, it was always really Stellar and Ripple at the very forefront of all of this, who were positioned to dominate from the beginning. So whatever we see happening in the ecosystem, again, it's not an accident. It's all deliberate. It's all gradual progression. And to David's points over there, talking about when regulations do come indeed with clarity, you can see how, for instance, XRP and even potentially XLM are really becoming digital collateral for where the financial system is heading. So this will change the broader dynamic of the market and how things are playing out. But we're still in a period where we don't have clarity, we don't have regulation, and it matters more than ever now because things are destabilizing to a degree. But behind the scenes, things are still being put together. David mentioned the whole idea of or the initiative, of Evernorth and the XRP Treasury. It kind of reveals a different kind of reality because the majority of XRP on exchanges today, it's effectively gone. I really think so. A lot of people don't look at the on-chain data. Liquidity is extremely thin, and that means any meaningful demand, if it were to come, and this about in the past, you will see for sure a remaining supply immediately vanish from all markets, and that results into an effective supply shock, essentially. And I think we're getting to a point where we are going to see something like this, and that's what some people, like in the comments here, is called the crack up boom is imminent. So I think the regulatory landscape is going to determine when we get this price shock. And like I said earlier, I do have a lot of optimism for the ecosystem, but it has to be grounded in reality. And I know in this ecosystem, we don't see a lot of reality. We see a lot of hype and noise. But, when we get the Clarity Act, when we start to see the new information reveal itself as far as the Trump administration, maybe you guys can bring me up to light on this. I know for a fact that Donald Trump is going to make an announcement, and I've heard from some people, prominent researchers, that obviously Ripple is going to play such a big role in this. So a lot of optimism, a lot of excitement. I want to get your take on everything, guys. That'd be great.
Yeah, I'll kick off real quick. The Clarity Act is so important. I think we talked about this a couple of weeks back. When, in my opinion, XRP and a select other few get deemed a commodity, it's game over. Because at that point, you've got all the institutions, all the big bodies know exactly what they're engaging in and what they're purchasing, what they're stockpiling, how they're using it. Massive, so important. I will add one little piece of extra flavor to this whole notion of gold revaluation, how this plays into the regulatory environment. It's two words that have popped up a lot across the critical pieces of regulation that have come out across the last year. Budget neutral has come up so much with how the US government can engage with future acquisition or utilization of these assets. Now, there's no smoking gun on this point. I don't know 100%, but the whole speculation around debt eradication or at least offsetting. I'm not saying it will entirely. What we have to factor in after this Clarity Act goes through is there is a very real world where if the US do revalue gold to a nominal price that's much higher, the book value, let's say they get an extra 3 trillion from the Fed, the Treasury gets issued, that is budget neutral to go and use however they want. I'm not saying they're going to go and buy a bunch of XRP or Bitcoin or whatever, but that's a fair amount of money to use at potentially floor prices, even if it is at $10 per coin for XRP, to potentially leverage into the future to offset the debt, along with the increased demand that we're already going to get from the debt-backed stablecoin issuance that's compulsory under the Genius Act. So there's a few different prongs that I'm seeing line up in legislation that could act as this massive hack to band-aid this situation, the US's debt dire situation. That's where my mind goes, more macro. I've just been looking at it like that. That's my 2 cents on the sort of the regulatory dominoes I see playing out potentially.
No, I think that's great. Let me also complement that. As gold is revalued, to your point, it's really revalued to absorb global debt and to restore the balance sheets of the central banks. Everything starts to look better. All of a sudden, deficits start to shrink. And that's when you have that intersection, again, to your point, where XRP does provide that settlement layer, that bridge settlement layer currency that moves this new collateral through a digital economy. So basically, gold carries and gives the system the weight, and XRP gives it its motion. So I think that's very interesting, and together I've believed this from the very beginning. I think, again, it is the most undertold story, is that together, that's how you have a real monetary reset. That is potentially a foundation of a new financial infrastructure. And you have to ask the question, right? If central banks and big institutions are buying up the gold, and yeah, maybe they're reporting it, they're manipulating it here and there. I don't care. I don't look at the surface level information. I look at the actual data of what's happening. They are indeed buying resources, commodities, and there's going to be a digital layer for all of this. So they don't have to say it for us to speculate on it. I think the whole idea of what we're trying to do here is to trend forecast, look at the facts, connect the dots, cross-reference the research, and see where this is going. I think, gold and XRP, I'm just such an advocate for this. It only makes sense. It makes sense. I don't know how anybody in this ecosystem cannot see that. And sure, there are other specific technologies that complement this ecosystem. Thoughts, Edo? You've been quiet.
Yeah, I'm observing a lot of the information you guys putting out. As you have seen, I have been absent from this space in the last 3 months. However, I do want to say something. First, I don't want to know what central banks are saying. I really don't care about what they say, as you say, on the surface. But honestly, I like to copy their strategy and do what central banks are actually doing. And what they have been doing in the last 5 years is accumulating large sums of gold and precious metals. It's basically the opposite of what happened in the 90s, when central banks were known to be the greatest sellers of precious metals. This is reversed back in 2020. Since 2020 onwards, they have been the greatest buyers of precious metals. Therefore, I like to copy their strategy. I have been listening to your advice, Versan. I have been accumulating since I think I started watching your videos before we were even friends on this space. And one of the reasons I got the opportunity to buy silver and gold at very cheap prices was because of your videos. Now, I am 100% sure there will be an intersection between XRP and precious metals, specifically gold. We are moving towards a digital economy, and if you think there will not be an intersection between the most important digital asset, which happens to be XRP, and gold, which central banks are doing 2 things behind the scenes. 1, setting the stage for a new global economy, and number 2, accumulating precious metals. But you can be sure they are also accumulating XRP behind the scenes. I have made several videos pointing out the reasons why, not only me, but also Nate and also Versan and David, we have been talking about this openly. Now, it's only a matter of which system, how they're going to do this in the matter of which technology they're going to use to create this intersection. I don't really know if we can say, for example, XRP is going to be effectively backed by gold, but definitely there is going to be an intersection. I have done countless researches in the past, and I have found deep connections between XRP and gold. Now, we can't say it's going to be backed by gold, but I do believe there's going to be an intersection between the two.
Well, it's not just gold. I'll let you speak, David. I'm very sorry. It's not just gold. And we've also talked about this openly on the channel, The Turning Point, before. And it was Simon Hunt in 2022 who gave my brother and I some very interesting insight. Everyone, I encourage you to go check it back. It was 2022. It's old, but still more relevant today. And Simon Hunt said the new currency from his sources in the Middle East, and this was back, he lives in Dubai right now. He's very well connected in the silver and copper markets to China and everything. And he said this new currency system that they were building would have an intersection with blockchain, but he said it would be a basket of commodities. So when you think about it, you have a settlement layer, and that's, I think, what XRP is, right? But what's backing all of it? Again, real tangible value, real commodities, real assets. So it's potentially accurate to say that it'd be a basket of commodities that then XRP, what does it do? How does its price scale? It has to be at a higher price to scale that system. So it's absorbing the value. It's absorbing the liquidity, excuse me. And that's what maybe it's backed by everything, something like that. Now that's speculation. I don't actually know, but I'm just throwing the thought out there. David, would you like to add something to that?
Well, I really want to get your guys' perspective on this. So all of you, Nate, Edo, Versan, to comment. So I've kind of looked at, like in the last century. So in the 19th century, you had in 1912, a major outbreak across the world of the Spanish flu. After that, of course, we know that, the IMF came in 1913. And there was a big run-up in markets, big run-up in markets. And everybody and their dog the leveraging, everything was going crazy. And of course, then there was a collapse and gold spiked. Well, the government then, through executive order, at least in the United States, confiscated the gold, and they basically reneged on their obligations monetarily is what was really going on. And then they, after they did the confiscation, they revalued that price of gold. Then what happened? Well, the world went to war. Now, after World War II, what came out of it? Well, World Bank, International Monetary Fund, Bank of International Settlements, a lot of financial infrastructure came on the scene. Well, we have had at the beginning of this, current century, major issue here. They had basically closed all, manufacturing, shipping, everything, all the service business, everything. World has a major move, and we have seen the markets just go to brand new all-time highs. The Nasdaq, the Dow, the S&P, the Russell, everything. In the same environment that we're watching an equity explosion, there is big time fear because the price of gold and silver and commodities like that, bang, going off. Just crazy, right? And it would not surprise me if we saw a situation, and that's where I'm wanting to get your feedback. If in fact, we saw some measure of confiscation, price of gold drops, they confiscated, they revalue it after the fact. And then what they turn around and do is, instead of backing, let's say XRP or another global agnostic currency that will replace this fiat currency, I don't think it'll be a nation based. I think it'll be a agnostic one. At that point, they may be able to tokenize gold on like the XRP ledger, for instance. The price of XRP fires off because, all of these major assets and commodities are now tokenized on the ledger. real world asset tokenization, not necessarily backed, but it seems like a formula is being followed here. And it seems like the rhetoric is almost in line with what we heard. I mean, you go back and read some of those old newspapers and the rhetoric, it feels very, very similar. So what do you guys think? Do you think that we could be kind of like not necessarily repeating history, but rhyming it?
I think David, Nathan's take. My apologies.
I think the answer is kind of yes, but we are in a very different technological age. And the way I look at it is governments have always been problem, reaction, solution, no pragmatism. But with the free markets exploding the last 30 years and the dawn of the internet and the democratization of, I guess, freedom of expression within capital markets and business, for instance, Ripple's a prime example of this. I think what we're actually seeing is not pragmatism from the government standpoint, but an ushering in of the solution in real time whilst the implosion is imminent. The big part of the XRP law is this notion of the phoenix rising from the ashes. And I do believe, much to your point, I do believe there will be an event. Versan, Vandel, Ito, you've all talked about it, whether it's 2026. I think there is an event, a GFC on steroids, probably. But even in the GFC, it was only a short period of time where everything nuked, then gold ran. So the select commodities that are going to safe haven are going to run. So we're positioned perfectly, in my opinion. And I think it's more this free market pragmatism that is going to band-aid the negligence of the problem reaction solution modality that's always been there as we go in. And that's not just because we're in this space and I don't want to see our assets nuke. I think it is actually because we've never technologically been able to apply this band-aid, if you will, or it's not a band-aid, it's actually a pretty robust solution to the problem. And that you can see in the legislation, in the language choices, that's kind of where we're heading, in my opinion. And that's how I see it. So it's a two-parter for me.
Can I add something to that? David and I, we talked also about this off record. There's no doubt that when history repeats itself, rhymes differently. You've heard that a lot now. But when an empire starts to lose control of the narrative, of the propaganda, and that's what we do see happening in the world where, like Nathan said, digital infrastructure, things are really changing very fast. The world is changing. Human behavior is changing. Things are changing, right? That balance is now being rebuilt through these technological advancements, through tokenization, for instance, tokenized collateral, the balance between interoperable networks, neutral reserves of liquidity, things of that nature. And that's kind of where, again, XRP assets that are designed to move value across borders without the political bias. So to your point, David, I've always agreed with you on this. History is repeating itself, but you have to remember that the financial order, the old order, out with the old, in with the new, is collapsing under its own weight by design. And this is something Nathan talks a lot, how this plan has been in motion for centuries. And he's not wrong. We'll dive deeper into that here shortly. But make no mistake, when new systems bring in new forms of control, you have to understand that. So that's something to be mindful of. And I think the next world order, I don't want to say new world order to get bad publicity here. I don't think it's going to be a copy of the old one. I think it's going to be some sort of new data-driven one, right? That's deeply integrated with digital IDs, digital assets. And that's where things start to get really outlandish and scary. And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole either. But in my opinion, what I've been teaching on my private sessions, I've always told people layer number one before any of these conversations, the real challenge, ladies and gentlemen, and the challenges even we're experiencing in our investment opportunities and challenges is to make sure that we are sovereign individuals. You don't want to get that replaced by a surveillance state program. And again, going back to gold, I think it gives nations leverage. And again, with the dollar and the world order collapsing, you're going to see a multipolar world. And that's what this technology is designed to do. Before we got onto this podcast, I'm actually listening to the Prime Minister of Singapore. You maybe not be able to see this, but this is kind of what I'm listening to see what the rest of the world is thinking. And it's not getting a lot of publicity, you know, but don't you want to hear what the rest of the world is saying? What other prime ministers are thinking, what other presidents are talking about? It's just we don't get to hear what the rest of the world is doing. And if you look at what the BRICS nations are doing, and including this gentleman here, Prime Minister of Singapore, they're talking about a multipolar world. And they're talking about a world where debt, derivatives, the manipulation kind of comes to an end and gives more transparency and collateral, real assets. So I think there are a lot of real systemic changes happening behind the scenes that we're not familiar with. All we're doing is taking a step back and trying to really speculate on all of this and look at the bigger picture. And the truth is not going to be found in headlines, or in my opinion, and that's why I've attacked financial analysts a few times here and there. The charts, the financial data, most of it is bullshit. Okay. And that's a fact.
They've been so wrong this cycle, Versan, haven't they? I mean,
yes, they have. Thank you very much.
It's been crazy, man. Like, not
agree
one TA guy has accurate nothing.
No, exactly.
I mean,
thank you very much. I've seen TA guys making apologies. Okay. And I posted this on my Patreon. I'll let you speak. I'm very sorry.
No.
You know, the macro data, the macro cycles, that is the data that matters most, because those structural changes don't change. Okay. Ray Dalio, he changed my life with his book called The World Changing Order. Okay. And the thing is, I don't take everything literally. I look at it with a grain of salt and kind of apply it to where we are today in the world we're in. So final thing I'll say, and I do want to get your take on this, Nathan, because you have something very interesting you've been putting in your videos. But from The Matrix, from a bunch of other Hollywood productions and pictures, there's a consistent undercurrent of subtext, okay, this subliminal programming, and that seems to mirror the architecture of what's unfolding every day around us, not just us, but XRP and the transformation of the world. So it gets really deep, that rabbit hole. You know, I want to hear your thoughts, all of you.
Yeah, well, I can go again if you want. I released part one of probably the culmination of my research in the space. It'll be a 3-part series. It's got great reception so far. The Ripple Bible. You know, mostly the fundamentals, a lot of the dot connecting we've talked about today, the people that contributed in the angel round, venture seed round, Series A, Series B. We really unpacked the where the money came from to build this behemoth that we know is going to succeed in the new financial order. But also the legacy families and how they've consolidated their power within the economic amalgams, like your Bilderberg groups, your World Economic Forums, your G30, your Trilateral Commission, your IIF. These are the underbelly of the central banks that actually dictate what the central banks do. So no one looks at these think tanks that are actually guiding. So we really look at that. And to me, it all does in the end tie back into this notion of XRP law and symbology and why it keeps popping up and why good people have come to the ecosystem when it clearly potentially juxtaposes the insidious design from the consolidated wealth. And the only answer I've landed on logically is God. The symbology we keep seeing, X, the cross, Jesus was on the cross, XP is Christos in Greece. You know, Constantine's armies, Constantine's Rome planted XP on the first ever coins, first Christogram, whatever you can go all the way back there. And then we go into the modern, the Matrix, the Simpsons, all of this. Why does it happen? I can't tell you unequivocally. I can give you we've given you the fundamentals for years. Why are we all attracted to it and siloed off from 99% of the crypto community? The answer has to be the higher power. That's where I've landed, and I'm very confident in my standing on that. We see through the noise and just how, just like how Moses parted the Red Sea, didn't know how it was going to happen till he got there. I do think this technology could be that type of moment in history. God uses evil forces how he wants as well to contribute to his to benefit his people. So while some people there think, oh, well, how it just doesn't make sense. Like, why are we prescribing to this clearly malevolent beast system? I think there's another chapter to be written that most people are missing. And I'm very confident in all of our stances within the space. So, that's a high level. The part 2 and 3 come out soon. Part 2 is more the intelligence ties. Ido, I've been meaning to catch up with you. I've expounded upon your research into Ripple communications massively. And I've found some pretty wild things within the Nussel family. So Nussel's husband actually worked in government under Bush. He works at the Credit Union of America, still does. He's the one who partnered with Corda. So the entire American Credit Union Association runs on R3 Corda, and R3 Corda obviously uses XRP for settlement. So there's a whole tree there that we'll go into. I'd love to get you offline so we can flesh more out. And I'd love to bring your Bitcoin stuff in as well, because I want this thing to just be the nail in the coffin for everyone. And then the final part is what I just touched on, the law and the symbology and the biblical component that is so dear to me. So, yeah, that's my 2 cents on why that pops up, the symbols.
Very powerful. Very powerful. David, you got something to say?
Well, I was just going to say one of my favorite verses in the Bible is Proverbs 19:21, where it says, many are the plans of a man's heart. It's the Lord's purpose that prevails. And I would also agree. I think there's some, divine fulfillment falling out, and people think that this is just something we believe because we've been taught to believe it. And that is just such a delusional way of thinking, because my experience faith-wise and how it's incorporated a lot of the decisions that Judy and I have made in this space have all been, a relational based kind of experience, a faith-based experience of something happening right here. And I have felt so much conviction about where we're at and what we're doing, that and a degree of purpose in it that just has kept me going a lot, because it would be easy on the surface, would it not, just to be, this isn't going anywhere, fold it all in and that's it. Because this XRP ecosystem, come on, we have experienced more FUD than any other ecosystem out there. On top of that, we haven't seen the level of price appreciation that we should see when you consider, the major catalysts that have happened. I mean, XRP right now should be probably 10 or 15 bucks in my mind right now. And based on the fact that the lawsuit is done, you're watching the infrastructure of Ripple being blown out. You've got all these major institutions. Look who's invited over to Swell and is going to be speaking there. You got BlackRock, you got Trump's administration, you got all these major, there is something happening here that is not fitting exactly, right into the mold. And to me, there is definitely strategy afoot. And so this is where I don't know what the future holds. None of us really do in that regard, but I have a confidence about who holds the future. And this is where I've also put a lot of my, decision-making has gone through that filter. And yeah, you got to leave it up to yourself, of course, but we're all speculating. We're not throwing darts at balloons here. We're speculating, and we're taking what information we have in hand and we're employing that into our decision making with respect to our investments, because we see, hey, there's a potential return on this investment one way or the other. And for me, I have to employ that. So I appreciate Nate saying that, because I do believe the same way.
Wise words, David. And Nathan, yeah, I want to know more about your research. I have put so much hours on researching Ripple communications. If anyone is interested, you can check on my videos. I have proved that's factual evidence that Ripple is not a private company. And I'm very looking forward, Nathan, to hear about the research as well. Now, final thoughts from my side. I totally agree, Versan. Most people who were doing TA were 100% wrong in the last 3 months. There's so much market manipulation. Let me quickly share the screen here so I can present something. Okay, this is actually BTC charts, and this massive red candle here, it comes down to 3 weeks ago in the largest liquidation event in history. That shows us the importance to not be over leveraging yourself. So I want to make a personal recommendation, guys. If you are using leverage, please don't ever go with cross. That will actually put the entire portfolio at risk. So at least if you use leverage, use isolated, because you can see that they are actively manipulating the markets. There's a lot of selling pressure on BTC whenever it approaches a new all-time high. We can see that there are people trying to actually get rid of BTC. Not people, but entities. I have done lots of videos on that as well with the dormant BTC wallet. So that's a major systemic risk to Bitcoin. On the other hand, we have something very interesting that we can talk in the next turning point, and I have been doing some research on that. There is a lot of pressure on XRP, but a good sort of pressure, and that's about the supply shock. There is currently a couple billion XRP that are left for retail investors. So that reflects to tiny order books, and also the extreme volatility that we had in the past 2 or 3 weeks when we saw these massive liquidation events. It also shows us that, in the other hand, whenever there is buying pressure, we can see the price of XRP to rise above exponentially. And we're talking about $10 like instantly. I'm not even joking. And that's because of the supply shock. And the same thing doesn't happen for BTC. That's why I believe there will be a decouple from the overall markets, because in one hand you have BTC that has all these dormant wallets, BTC that were mined back in 2011 that are sitting idle, just waiting for the price to go up so they can actually sell this BTC and liquidate it. In the other hand, you have a massive supply shock that's developing for XRP. So it's impossible that on the long run, these assets are going to still be connected. That's my perspective. I truly believe in the next months, we're going to see the unveiling of this actually in real time playing out on the charts. So I do expect this decouple moment. And finally, I want to send a special thanks for everyone. Your support means a lot to me. I have been reading the comments. I know I have been absent for 3 months. I have had a very harsh time recently, but I'm putting my energy back now to actually go back to making content. So I appreciate your support. And last message, be very careful with exchanges. In this day that we had the massive liquidation, I was actually trading. So what happened is that it was impossible to execute any buy orders or sell orders. So this really shows that the game is rigged. It was impossible, for example, unless you had buy orders, which by luck, if they were executed, not for everyone, it was impossible to trade. So the system is really rigged. The best thing you can do, in my opinion, is just hold. It's like spot trading. I mean, buy spot, don't do leverage. And I tried to withdraw money to make a test from probably the biggest exchange, or the second one, which is Binance. And it was 100% impossible. So it's very shady that you couldn't withdraw any money when there was selling pressure on the exchange. I was trying to actually take euros and send to my bank account as a test, and it was impossible. In the next hour, because I was consistently trying, I decided to withdraw a large sum. Okay, let me put this very clear. Most of my crypto is in cold wallets, but I do have cash that I use to trade on the exchanges. But I made a decision after that event, and I basically took most of my money out of exchanges. Like the small money I had, I even took that out, because I don't see any point on taking big risks or even small risks. Why would you want to lose money anyway? So I think you should make some investment in good and trustworthy cold wallets. I think that's extremely, extremely important for the next months to come. That's my final message.
Well, it's nice to hear you're your thoughts again, Edo. I truly missed you, man. I need you on this show with us, man. It's incredible to have you back, and I'm truly grateful you're here and that everything was maybe not entirely resolved the way you wanted, but I do believe that in due time you will get your, what you want and what you deserve, really. Final thoughts I'd like to share with everybody also, in very simple terms. And I do want to talk a little bit about what Nathan said. I'll try to make it quick. So much to unpack in what you guys said. But in simple terms, the ones holding XRP are the people that hold the keys to the rails. Okay. So the banks, they're not going to maybe, and this kind of goes back to the on and off ramps, right? People were trying to cash out, but they couldn't. Makes you wonder, okay, well, if they're controlling the on and off ramps, they kind of control the exit doors. And I treat exchanges like the exit doors, right? I don't keep cryptocurrencies ever on my exchanges. I use exchanges to get in and out because that's the way they've managed to make it, right? You have to go through an exchange to go through a bank to get your money out so you can go buy physical assets or whatever. And that's the problem I've always experienced. So I keep everything on cold storage. I wait for the problem to kind of subside, and then I'll get onto the exchanges and treat it like that. The other thing is, I think, it's very possible that, and I've said this before to your point, Nathan, that it's very possible that XRP holders are actually holding the banks hostage. Not politically, but economically, if you think about it, because the ledger was kind of built to serve as institutional's ultimate power for the very assets that they have to acquire to stay solvent. Interesting, right? Makes you wonder. And then when you look at kind of the bigger picture, to what you were saying, the biblical narrative, you start to decode a lot of this stuff, and that's what you've been doing. And you're terrific. You're doing a terrific job, Nathan. But there's a lot of symbolic analysis, and I have noticed that. And the more research you do into all of this, it does become harder and harder to dismiss as a coincidence. It actually feels intentional. It feels by design. You have to ask yourself, of course, of how far does this design go back? And only God truly knows. But the deeper you do look, the more you realize that none of this is random. It's a financial realignment, sure, but there is a technological singularity at the heart of all of this. And that's kind of the mergence of the real and the digital, or even code and consciousness even. So who knows how it's going to really play out. But if you go deeper down the rabbit holes, which we don't have time to right now, but I've noticed a lot of people in the Rumble community, because they can't talk about this on YouTube, they've explained in detail how there are timelines that are splitting and parallels are coming out. And you're familiar with what I'm talking about, right? When you take a step back and kind of reflect on what they're talking about, you see some patterns, but I don't really know. And I'm not going to live in that kind of speculation. But I do know one fact for sure, that XRP wasn't designed to be cheap. You can't move global debt. You can't move derivatives. You can't move liquidity with a low value bridge asset. So a high price of XRP is just a matter of time at this point. And it's very possible maybe we are holding the hostages, the banks hostage. And what they're trying to do is inflict us with economic hardships. And I've seen this before. So I know that part to be true, to get you to sell your assets. Why, right? So I think over time, if we continue to just hold on longer, they're going to implode eventually. And they're going to be like, well, screw it. We can't wait any longer. We got to go to the new system. And that's that flip the switch moment. Who knows? But remember, they do control a lot of the regulations around it too. So, something maybe we can dissect a little bit more later on. But terrific work from all of you. I mean, you guys are incredible. I love all of you, man. I really do.
Thanks, Versan.
Likewise, Versan.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Edo. It's been great to have you back on, and this is the second time with Nathan, and it's been really great conversation. Truly appreciate it. And for the community, if anything, be motivated to get out there and do your own digging. I always like to say the answers we find for ourselves are the ones we generally trust the most. So I hope that has encouraged you for sure.
Incredible. Well, final thing I'll say is thank you all for the love and the support. And David, thanks again for coming to my wedding. That was terrific. We are going to renew our vows next year and try to do it a little bit bigger and maybe get some of our good friends to come in too. So I'm very excited about that. But I want to thank everyone for all the love and support. It's I'm very excited about this, and I've never been happier. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, take care. Thanks. We'll see you in the next week. Bye.